Hi, everyone. I'm here to read the next chapter of I Thought It Was Just Me, but It Isn't. So I'm reading chapter 7 today. So sit back, relax, get comfortable, and I'm going to read chapter 7 for you. Practicing courage in a culture of fear. There may be more powerful relationships. There may be no more powerful relationships than the ones that exist between fear and shame. These two emotions often work together to create the perfect emotional storm. Shame leads to fear, and fear leads to shame. They work together so furiously that it's often hard to tell where one stops and the other one begins. Shame, or our fear of disconnection, causes us to be afraid of many things. The issue that I see affecting women the most are our fears of being imperfect, ordinary, and uncool and vulnerable. In the following sections, we'll explore these struggles and how the elements of shame resilience can help us practice courage and compassion in the face of fear. Perfectionism is the voice of the oppressor. Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird, 1994. Shame and perfectionism. I think I've seen the movie Flashdance at least 20 times. In the 1980s, I wanted to be just like Jennifer Bell's character, Alex. She was the tough construction worker by day and talented, ambitious dancer by night. Of course, my favorite part of the movie is the dance scene in which Alex auditions for the hoity-toity ballet school. I'm too embarrassed to tell you how many sweatshirts I ruined and how many leg warmers I bought. Of course, I wasn't alone. Nothing took the mystique out of my secret flash dance fantasy, like showing up to meet friends for dinner and realizing that all 6 of us have permed hair, headbands, and ripped sweatshirts. We all wanted to be Alex and flash dance. She was perfect. Ripped clothing looked sexy. Wielding looked exciting. Ballet looked cool, and breakdancing looked easy. But alas, the perfection was only an illusion. I was disappointed to learn that the film director used 4 different people to create the audition sequence. Jennifer Bell's beautiful face, a professional dancer for the ballet scenes, a champion gymnast for the leaping and jumping, and a male street performer for the breakdancing. All of those bad perms and all that money for the leg warmers, for what? To try and achieve some level of perfection that doesn't exist. If most of us stopped to examine the expectations we set for ourselves, we would discover that, like the scene in Flashdance, our concept of perfection is so unrealistic that it can't exist in one person. Instead, it's a combination of pieces or snippets of what's perceived as perfect. We don't just want to be good at what we do, we want to be perfect. We want to edit together all the best clips of what we see to form our lives. So where does this idea of editing for perfection come from? The answer is right in front of us. It's the shame web. If we look at all the people in the shame web, family, partners, friends, self-colleagues, group members, etc., most of us can identify the expectations these people have of us. This is especially true around some of the shame categories like appearance, motherhood, parenting, work, and family. These categories seem to come up many, many times. The primary reason the expectations around these issues are so influential is related to how quickly they are imposed on our lives. On the day that we are born, there are immediate expectations that we will be cute and attractive. We will grow up, get married, be successful, become mothers, have natural parenting skills, and be loving members of sane and well-balanced families. Complicating matters, we have the media, which makes perfection appear attainable by inundating us with images that are quite literally edited for perfection. Let me say that again. Complicating matters, we have the media, which makes perfection perfection appear attainable by inundating us with images that are quite literally edited for perfection. So keep that in mind. Every time you watch something, it's edited. We stare down our newborns and fast forward through their lives, thinking and dreaming about their potential. As parents, we even think, I haven't screwed up anything yet. They could have it all. In some families, these expectations are spoken loud and clear. In other families, they are more latent. But regardless of how they are articulated at home, girls and women have these messages reinforced on a daily basis. But what we see on television, the books we read, the toys we're given to play with, the conversations we overhear, and what we are taught by educators and peer groups. The powerful effect of these expectations can easily be seen around the issues of body image, caregiving, and motherhood, three of the biggest perfectionism struggles that emerge from the research. Let's look at these issues, starting with body image. Body image. When I first identified the shame categories, appearance stood alone and was meant to capture all parts of how we look, including body image. But as I continued to collect data, I realized that the specific topic of body image has more than earned its place on the list of shame categories. While appearance is a broad category that covers everything from body image to clothing, fitness, and style, body image is the driving force behind appearance shame. In fact, body image is the only issue that comes closest to being a universal trigger, with more than 90% of the participants experiencing shame about their bodies. Body shame is so powerful and often so deeply rooted in our psyche that it actually affects why and how we feel shame in many of the other categories, including sexuality, motherhood, parenting, health, aging, and a woman's ability to speak out with confidence. Our body image is how we think and feel about our bodies. It is the mental picture we have of our physical bodies. Unfortunately, our pictures, thoughts, and feelings may have little to do with our actual appearance. It is our image of what our bodies are, often held up to our image of what they should be. While we normally talk about body image as a general reflection of what we look like, we can't ignore the specifics, the body parts that come together to create this image. If we work from the understanding that women most often experience shame when we become trapped in a web of layered, conflicting, and competing expectations of who, what, and how we should be, we can't ignore that these are social community expectations for every single tiny part of us, literally from our heads to our toes. I'm going to list our body parts because I think they are important: head, hair, neck, face, ears, skin, nose, eyes, lips, chin, teeth, shoulders, back, breast, waist, hips, stomach, abdomen, buttocks, vulva, anus, arms, wrists, hands, fingers, fingernails, thighs, knees, calves, ankles, feet, toes, body hair, body fluids, pimples, scars, freckles, stretch marks, and moles. Again, I bet if you look at each of these areas, you have specific body part images for each one of them, not to mention a mental list of what you'd like to look like and the unwanted identities that you want to avoid. When our very own body fills us with disgust and feelings of worthlessness, shame can fundamentally change who we are and how we approach the world. Consider the woman who stays quiet in public out of the fear that her stained and crooked teeth will make people question the value of her contributions. Or the woman who told me that the one thing she hates about being fat is the constant pressure to be nice to people. She explained, if you're bitchy, they might make a cruel remark about your weight. The research participants also spoke often about how body shame either kept them from enjoying sex or pushing them into having it when they didn't really want to, but were desperate for some type of physical validation of worthiness. There were also many women who talked about the shame of having their bodies betray them. These were women who spoke about physical illness, mental illness, and infertility. We often conceptualize body image too narrowly. It's about more than wanting to be thin and attractive. When we begin to blame and hate our bodies for failing to live up to our expectations, we start splitting ourselves in parts and moving away from our wholeness, our authentic selves. We can't talk about shame and body image without talking about the pregnant body. I think there are stages to the pregnant body, each susceptible to shame in its own way. First, there's a woman who wants to become pregnant. I heard story after story about the pressure to be thin and in top shape before becoming pregnant. As we saw from the quote earlier in the book, one woman took her own health and her prenatal care into her hands to avoid being shamed by the doctor because she feared she was too fat to be pregnant. Next, there is the pregnant body. Has any body image been more exploited in the past few years? Don't get me wrong. I'm all for exploring the wonders of the pregnant body and removing the stigma and shame of the pregnant belly. But let's not replace that with one more airbrushed, computer-generated, shame-inducing image for women to not be able to live up to. Movie stars who gain 15 pounds and have their stretch marks airbrushed for their "look, I'm human too" portraits do not represent the realities that most of us face while pregnant. Last, there is the post-pregnant mother body. When women spoke to me about their post-baby body image struggles, I heard more than experiences of shame. I heard grief, loss, anger, and fear. In addition to the weight gain, hemorrhoids, and stretch marks, women struggled with the very real and permanent changes that we often experience after pregnancy and delivery. Again, the media is a very strong force in the expectation setting done around post-pregnancy body images. Within a week, we're expected to be back in our low-rise jeans, midriff-bearing t-shirts, sporting a $500 diaper bag, and carrying our children around like the year's hottest accessory. Yeah, right. Parenting is also a shame category affected by body image. As admittedly vulnerable, imperfect parent, I'm not one to jump on the blame parents for everything, especially the mothers, bandwagon. Having said that, I will tell you what I found out in my research. Shame creates shame. Parents have a tremendous amount of influence on their children's body image development, and girls are still being shamed by their parents, primarily their mothers, about their weight. When it comes to parenting and body image, I find that parents fall along a continuum. One side of the continuum, there are parents who are keenly aware that they are the most influential role models in their children's lives. They work diligently to model positive body images, self-acceptance, acceptance of others, no emphasis placed on the unattainable or ideal, focusing on health rather than weight, and deconstructing media messages, etc. On the other side of the continuum are parents who love their children just as much as their counterparts, but are so determined to spare their daughters the pain of being overweight or unattractive, and their son the pain of being weak, that they will do anything to steer their children towards achievement of the ideal, including belittling and shaming them. Many of these parents struggle with their own body image and process their shame by shaming. Last, there are the folks in the middle who really do nothing to counter the negative body image issues, but also don't shame their children. Unfortunately, due to societal pressures in the media, most of these kids do not appear to develop strong shame resilience skills around body image. There just doesn't appear to be any room for neutrality on this issue. You are either actively working to help your kids develop a positive self-concept, or, by default, you are sacrificing them to the media and society-driven expectations. As you can see, what we think, hate, loathe, and question about our bodies reaches much further and affects far more than our appearance alone. The long reach of body shame can impact how we live and love. Same could be said for caregiving and motherhood, which the next section is about caregiving. I was not surprised to hear painful stories after painful story, after painful story about caregiving, especially stories about the struggle to take care of a sick parent or an aging family member. The most difficult experience centered on taking care of sick or aging parents. In the mental health field, we recognize caregiving as one of the most stressful life events people face. When women talked about the anxiety, fear, stress, and shame of being a caregiver, I could hear the demons of perfectionism in their stories. Regardless of the words spoken, I could hear them comparing the hard realities of their day-to-day responsibilities to their to their images of stress-free, dutiful, and rewarding caregiving. I'm afraid any image of stress-free, dutiful, and rewarding caregiving is a luxury available only to those who have yet to fully engage in this process. When most of us think about the eventuality of taking care of an elderly parent or partner, we get anxious, sad, and fearful. In order to quash those uncomfortable emotions, we sometimes convince ourselves that it will be different for us. It won't be as horrible as it is for the woman who sits next to us at work or our good friend whose mother is a tough case. We try to escape reality by dwelling in the possibilities of perfection. It will work out just fine. It will be a great chance for us to spend some more time together. So when we find ourselves actually caregiving, we are not at all prepared. For the first time, our feelings of I love you and it's a privilege to take care of you turn into I hate you and I hate you and I'm ready for you to die because I need my life back. The stress, anxiety, fear, and grief are magnified as shame and self-loathing set in. Are we monsters? How can we feel like this? We're not monsters, and we feel like this because we are human beings trying to manage a major life event with very little support and resources typically offered to people in crisis. During the interviews, women in caregiving roles were incredibly hard on themselves. They often sounded disappointed and sometimes even disgusted by their lack of natural caregiving skills. As I probe deeper about this disappointment, many of them compared their caregiving experiences to parenting. They saw themselves as good, kind people whose nurturing skills had somehow failed them. People often make the mistake of comparing caregiving with parenting. On the face of it, this might make sense. But if we really examine the differences, we could see how absolutely different they are and how believing they are the same sets us up for shame. First, and most importantly, we don't have the same relationship with our parents or partners as we do with our children. We don't have to bite through our lips not to cry when we are bathing our children. But that's exactly what I did the first time I bathed my grandmother. And I wasn't her primary caregiver. My mother was shouldering the burden of taking care of her and her sister at the same time. The energy we need to take care of children is fueled by promise. Taking care of another adult is often steeped in fear and grief, especially if this person is at the end of his life or facing an unknown future. Fear and grief don't fuel us, they usually drain us. Second, we live in a society that has put systems in place specifically to support parents and children. Schools and childcare facilities are the easy ones, but it's more than that. Tables, houses, cars, restaurants, they're all built for families that are defined as parents and children. There are thousands of parenting books and magazines. There are play groups and organized activities. As parents, we're given lots of opportunities to fit in and build connection. When we are caregivers for another adult, parent or otherwise, nothing fits. Our job is on the line because we constantly need to leave work for appointments and medical emergencies. Our partners can no longer make it down the stairs in our house, or our parent absolutely refuses to move in with us, if that's even a possibility. And worst of all, we feel absolutely disconnected. In order to maintain the energy we need to caregive, we unhook ourselves from our lives and plug into the person who needs our attention and time. There is one thing that parenting and caregiving have in common, and it's not a positive thing. When it comes to these two issues, everyone is a critic. Chelsea, a woman in her late 50s, spoke powerfully about the scrutiny of caregiving. My dad died 2 years ago. It was sudden and unexpected. My family was heartbroken, especially my mom. She had been sick for what feels like forever, and he was the one who took care of her. Now we take care of my mom, or should I say, I take care of my mom. My older brother is far too busy with his important life. My older sister's role is to observe and critique my every move. About 6 months ago, my husband and I realized we could no longer do it, neither physically nor emotionally. We decided to put mom in an assisted living facility close to our house. Well, my brother and sister were appalled. My sister actually said, "I can't believe you're going to put her in a prison like a criminal." My brother just said, "Absolutely not," in this very matter-of-fact tone. Of course, both of them said, due to their hectic life, they couldn't do any more than what they were doing. When I told them we had no choice, they said it was cruel and they wouldn't help pay for it. She's still living in our house. I still go over there every day on my lunch break or after work. My brother and sister choose to think everything is just perfect, even though my mom is getting worse and it's getting more dangerous for her to live by herself. And me, my marriage is on the rocks. My boss is always pissed, and I'm at my personal breaking point. Chelsea's story captures many of the complexities of caregiving. After we look at the motherhood and a few of the shared triggers around perfectionism, we'll examine the resilience strategies that can help us reality check the expectations and make this complicated issue even more difficult. Motherhood. While motherhood and parenting are certainly related, they emerged as two distinct shame areas. Mother shame is about our identities as mothers or our identity as women who are not mothers. Parenting shame is focused on how we raise and interact with our children. Mother shame is an overwhelming issue for women. Every single participant in a mother role identifies mother shame as an issue. And because motherhood is an identity that is so closely tied to being a woman, it becomes clear that you don't have to be a mother for motherhood to be a shame issue. As we learned in the powerful guide on understanding infertility, women struggle with infertility, talked passionately about the mother shame in their lives. So did women who have chosen to delay having children or not to have children. Society views womanhood and motherhood as combined together, as they go together. Therefore, our value as women is often evaluated by whether or not we are in relation to our roles as potential mothers. In some communities, the expectation of motherhood has many layers, including norms of what's too young, what's too old, and what gender babies should be, as if mothers control this. Once women hit the age set by their community, they begin to feel the need to defend themselves against expectations of motherhood. Women are constantly asked why they haven't married, or if they're married, why they haven't had children. Even women who are married and have one child are often asked why they haven't had a second one. Women who have 4 or 5 kids are expected to explain why they have so many. Mother shame seems to be a birthright for girls and women. On top of the societal expectation that motherhood defines womanhood, There are some very rigid expectations about what the good mother looks like. There are some very desirable qualities associated with motherhood, and there are some characteristics that are universally unwanted. Interestingly, to be perceived as trying too hard was identified as an unwanted characteristic, not only for motherhood, but also for the areas in this category. We want perfection, but we don't want to look like we're working for it. We want it just to materialize somehow. Poof, there it is. Poof, there it is. You don't have the time or talent to look that messy. Even though I hear this every day, I bring my stack of Meg Ryan's pictures to my hairstylist. I still don't believe her. All I want is Meg Ryan's hair. The last time I asked, I want to look like I just rolled out of bed. How hard could that be? She spit back. It takes 2 hours and 10 people to get that natural look. Get over it. We want to be natural beauties, natural mothers, naturally good parents. We want to belong to naturally fabulous families. Think about how much money has been made selling products that promise the natural look. And when it comes to work, we love to hear she makes it look so easy or she's a natural. The research participants really exposed an interesting perfection paradox. Imperfection brings shame, and working too hard for perfection brings shame. In the age of instant gratification and celebrity for celebrity's sake, it is easy to understand how we've fallen for the idea that we can just want something bad enough and poof, there it is. How many of us have fallen prey to the saying, it shouldn't be this much work, or it just doesn't come naturally for me. It must not be my thing. Or I've heard people say, there's got to be something wrong with me because it doesn't come naturally to me. Yes, there are naturally talented people, but for most of us, including the celebrities, superstars, achievement is about hard work and commitment. 95% of the people who are in great shape and have healthy bodies work at it a lot. I know several people who possess parenting skills that I really respect, and they work at it a lot. They talk about parenting as a skills-based job that requires training, practice, and a significant time investment. They read, they take classes, they practice, and they evaluate their techniques and strategies. The same applies to family and motherhood. There is a direct correlation between input and output. The areas in this category are like other skill-based endeavors. If you have reasonable goals, the more you invest your time and resources and the more you practice, the more likely you are to reach those goals. A couple of years ago, a doctoral student told me, I'd love to write a book. I've been collecting materials for several years. I just don't think I can do it. When I asked her what was stopping her, she stared down at the ground between us and said, it's not easy for me. Writing is so stressful. I'm not like you. It just doesn't pour out of me. Plus, I'm not very thick-skinned, and they say writers need to be able to laugh off criticism. I could sense that she felt some shame as she explained this. Part of me felt real empathy for her. The other part of me was a little pissed off. I stood there thinking, writing just doesn't pour out of me. I tweeze it out one word at a time. Sometimes it's not too bad, and other days it's excruciating. In criticism, every writer I know struggles with criticism. You work at becoming better at hearing it, but it's painful, especially when it's personal. When we believe that success should be effortless, we simultaneously set ourselves up for shame and diminish the efforts of people who are working on their issues around us, around perfectionism. We become part of our own shame web and other women's shame web. How many times have we discussed somebody's efforts because we have bought into the expectation that family or motherhood shouldn't be that hard? Marriage, parenting, health, careers, motherhood, each of these requires a tremendous amount of work. and trying to balance the demands of these 5 areas might be the defining challenge of our lives. We need to reality check our expectations. Just because we don't sit down and channel the great American novel in 1 week doesn't mean we won't be good writers. We need to remember that behind every naturally gifted person is normally a huge amount of work, dedication, and commitment. Defending our lives. When I spoke with women about the pressures of perfection, they were quick to explain that failing to look, love, and work perfectly was only part of the problem. Of equal importance is the shame that stems from what we are willing to do to appear perfect or hide our imperfections. When perfection is the expectation and or the goal, we are willing to put a lot on the line to maintain and protect our image. Here are some women's stories. Shame is being married for 20 years and never walking around naked in front of your husband, not even once. I lie to people all the time. I tell them my father lives in New Jersey. He's been in prison for 6 years. I'm more ashamed of myself for lying than I am of my dad for being in jail. It's one thing if your family is different because your parents are divorced or something. It's different if your dad is a felon. My husband had an affair last year. I haven't even told my best friend. Everyone loves my husband and thinks we are a great couple. I know if I told her, she would think less of both of us, not just him. I want to go back to school and finish my degree, but with my kids and my part-time job, I just can't imagine being able to do it like I want to. I'm afraid I'll get a B or C. I don't want to do it unless I can do it 100%, so I don't go. I just tell people my parents travel a lot. Last year, I was the only freshman in my dorm whose parents didn't come for Parents' Weekend. I didn't invite them. They are racist and hateful, and they think the whole world is out to get them. My dad thinks everyone owes him. When I was growing up, I was always embarrassed for anyone to come to my house. It's like they're from a different planet. I filter everything I tell my parents. They don't know I'm gay, and they don't know I have a partner. There's a lot of pressure in the gay and lesbian community to come out. I know it's important, but you have to be prepared for your parents to walk out of your life. Not many people have to face that reality. People at work always say, everything she touches turns to gold. Sometimes it's true, but lately my projects have been way off. The first time I packaged a deal that lost money, everyone in my office freaked out. They blamed everyone but me, when in fact it was my fault. I made a bad call. The second time it happened, my coworkers did the same thing. That's when I realized that I've become a poster child for the department. They couldn't stand the thought of me making a bad call. In this business, we just need to make sure that we just need to make more than we lose. No one makes money on every deal, but I'm expected to. My boss told me, we need you to show people how it's done. We need you to set the bar. Now I dread work. I've started lying about my numbers and blaming losses on other people. We are also more willing to use shame, fear, and judgment with people who threaten our pursuit of perfection. We can feel threatened when people challenge or criticize us, or we can feel threatened simply because someone is making different choices than we would make. This comes up a lot around parenting, which is a particularly complex issue because we base our level of perfection both on how we are perceived as parents and how our children are perceived. As the examples throughout the book, and certainly several of the ones below, demonstrate, we are very susceptible to using shame, fear, and judgment against our children when they engage in behaviors that damage the parenting issue we are trying to create. When my husband and I told my parents that we had decided not to have children, they fell apart. They kept asking, "What's wrong with you? How could you do this to us?" My mother actually said, "It's a disgrace to the family. Everyone will think there's something wrong." I had known it would be hard, but it was far worse than I had imagined. My parents' dad was on one of his regular tirades yelling at her about being lesbian. He was calling her a butch and telling her she was an embarrassment to their well respected family. Then right in front of me he says, and of all the things you have to be a butch with a colored girlfriend. I remember just standing there thinking he did not just say that. We're not talking about Archie Bunker here. We're talking about a 50-year-old, overeducated oil and gas executive. Shame really causes people to act crazy. My husband is very tough on our son. He puts a lot of pressure on him. He wants him to get perfect grades and be the best baseball player at the school. I try to soften my husband up, but it never works. I see my son's stress. I used to talk about it with the other baseball moms, but I stopped. They started giving me a really hard time. They say the other kids think my husband is cruel and unfair. The other mothers think my husband and I are ruining my son's life. I have no idea what to do. I just stay quiet. In more extreme cases, our inability to expose imperfection can mean putting ourselves and or the people we care about in real danger. When I was pregnant, all my girlfriends said, "Oh, just wait, just wait. You're going to feel love that you never felt before. It's amazing." They'd go on. And after my first child was born, my son, I got really depressed and I actually didn't feel anything towards him. I just felt sad and overwhelmed and really wanted to go back in my life to a time before I even got pregnant. To feel like that when you look at your new baby, I was so ashamed. I thought, my God, I'm going to be one of those moms that, my son's going to turn out to be a crazy person and I'm a crazy person. My husband was so freaked out. I think he thought he was married to a monster. I don't think he knew what to say. And my mother-in-law just kept saying, "Something is wrong. She's not normal. Something is wrong. She's not normal." For 2 months, my life was a living hell. I wouldn't go to the doctor because I was too ashamed. Finally, when it got so bad I could barely function, I was afraid my family was going to put me away. I forced myself to go to the doctor. The doctor explained that some women experience depression after having a baby and it could be based on hormones. She said it could happen to me even if I'm normally a loving person. I got on medication, which that's pretty bad itself, but it's not as bad as feeling nothing towards your child. Within 2 months, I felt normal again. I just looked back at that time and know that was the darkest place I've ever been. I'm ashamed at how much I absolutely hate my body. I mean, I hate my body sometimes so much that I'd wish I'd get sick. I mean, really sick. So sick that I lost 30 or 40 pounds. I don't want to die, but if I could just be sick enough, I don't even care how miserable I'd be. But if I could be sick enough to lose 30 or 40 pounds and then be well, it would be worth it. I mean, can you imagine hating your body that much? It's like I'm ashamed of my body and I'm ashamed of how much I hate it. My daughter is on drugs and my son's in junior high is failing school. When your only job is raising your kids and they're both failures, then you're a failure. My friends keep telling me I need to get help for my daughter, but I don't know what to do. I can't tell my husband, he'd go nuts. I know she drinks and drives, but if I take her car away, he'd want to know why. At some point, I realized that refusing to see a doctor because I was ashamed of my body and being overweight was tantamount to suicide. It had to get that bad before I could force myself to go to the doctors. Sometimes I have unprotected sex. I know it's stupid, but it's such a turnoff to guys. It's hard enough being 30 and single. I don't want to be the safe sex police on top of that. If I ask and they pretend like they don't hear or say that they don't want to, I'm not comfortable making it an issue. As these quotes demonstrate, pursuing perfection can be as dangerous as it is unfulfilling. Sometimes the risks we take are not as obvious as the ones above. One example of this is my own struggle with being perceived as an overprotective and uptight mother. Between my experience as a social worker and Steve's experience in pediatrics, can't pronounce anything today. I've seen a disproportionate number of bad things happen to children. Sometimes it's difficult for me to tease out the fear from the reality-based concerns. Two issues that are particularly important to me are gun safety and seatbelts. If Ellen is invited to play at somebody's house, I want to make sure there aren't loaded guns in the house. And I want to make sure that she's properly restrained in a car seat if she's going to be in a car. For the past few years, she's been young enough that we've accompanied her to play dates. But as she gets older, that's changing. Sometimes I find myself silenced by the shame of appearing obsessively worried. I don't want to be perceived as that hysterical, hovering mom. I've had to really reach out to my connection network for support and help reframe the issues. A friend of mine who works in a teen pregnancy prevention program told me what she tells the kids. If you aren't comfortable enough to talk about condoms with somebody, that means you don't know them well enough to have sex. Now, rather than thinking, I hope they don't think I'm crazy, I think if I'm too ashamed to talk about these issues, I'm probably not comfortable enough with these folks to let Ellen go to their house unsupervised. Perfectionism and shame resilience. To better understand how each of the four elements of shame resilience can help us overcome perfectionism, I'll share another story about one of my personal struggles with perfectionism. When I was pregnant with Ellen, several companies, including a computer manufacturer, had advertising campaigns that featured young mothers working from home. And the ads portrayed the mother in her bunny slippers working away at the computer while her child gazed lovingly at her from the play mat situated right next to the desk. The commercials would always end with the mother simultaneously receiving praise and validation from her child and from her professional colleagues. I thought about that image every day. I wanted to be just like the commercials. I would picture myself in a cool t-shirt and size 8 yoga pants. I've never been a size 8. With a loose ponytail. I've had short hair for the past decade. A laptop, a cooperative baby smiling from the playmat, exciting work, and loads of personal and professional validation. Suffice it to say that someone at the marketing agency did their homework. I'm sure I was the targeted demographic, and I fell for it hook, line, and laptop. One day when Ellen was about 2 months old, my vision was realized. I was one of the 3 researchers being considered for a community evaluation project. I had a phone interview with 2 community leaders scheduled for 1 p.m. I had everything scheduled down to the minute. Ellen nursed at noon. It was sound asleep by 12:55. The call came in promptly at 1 p.m. I had all my questions prepared, a cell phone with a mute button and a headset ready just in case. It was perfect until 1:05. About 5 minutes into the interview, Ellen started crying. Not screaming, but crying. At 1:06, she stopped crying and started screaming. She screamed so loudly that both the interviewers asked if everything was okay. I quickly replied, "Everything's great. Please continue." As they explained their project, I went into Ellen's room, holding down the mute button and periodically testing its power by repeatedly asking, "Can you hear me? Can you hear me?" By the time I got to her crib, the front of her t-shirt was soaked wet with breast milk. Ellen had a certain call of the wild that would immediately send my milk making into overdrive. Ellen was screaming because she had one of those explosive poops that shoot up the back of the diaper and don't stop until the entire back of the onesie is covered. All of a sudden, as I'm evaluating the crib damage, I hear the dreaded, "Miss Brown, are you there?" "Yes, I'm here. I'm just taking notes so I can more thoroughly think through this project." "Can you tell me about the project funding?" Whew, it worked. As I started explaining important things that I should have been writing down, I kept one hand on the mute button, pushing Ellen against the crib bumper and sliding her into my arm. Poop was everywhere. I managed to get her undressed, clean her off with a dozen wet wipes, and carry her naked back to my room. She was still crying, and at this point, milk was literally dripping off my shirt. I laid her on my bed long enough to get one arm out of my t-shirt, pulled my drenched bra down around my waist, pulled the nursing pillow around me, and started feeding her. As soon as she was quiet, I came back to the call. I managed to make a few coherent statements before all hell broke loose. The stress of the situation was too much for my body to take. Within seconds, I was riding the wave, a serious diarrhea attack. At this point, I was standing up with the nursing pillow around my waist, tears pouring down my face, my t-shirt hanging around my back, and trying to do the pressed cheek penguin walk around the room. As gracefully as possible, I took myself out of the running for the position and thanked the interviewers for their time. I just sat there holding Ellen and crying. I felt ashamed about my inability to pull off my vision of working mother perfection. It was one thing to take myself out of the running for the research position, but it was even worse to look down at the little naked poop-smeared Ellen, and I feel like I had let her down too. A few weeks later, Steve and Dawn suggested that I apply what I was learning about shame to this situation. I'm no stranger to the shame research heal thyself comment. As I thought about it, my shame turned into disappointment, followed by disillusionment, followed by a healthy dose of I'm never going to fall for that smiling baby laptop bunny slipper bullshit again. Now when my first time mother friends tell me how they're going to work at home with their newborns, I'm quick to share my story. They often respond by asking, "Can't you just plan your work around the baby's schedule? Can't you just make sure she goes potty before the call?" I lovingly tell them, "Only in the commercials." When I apply the 4 elements of shame resilience to the situation, here's what I learned. Recognizing our shame triggers, I did not want to be perceived as incapable of balancing motherhood and work. I did not want to be perceived as needing help. I wanted to be perceived as one of those laid-back, balance everything, don't need help working mothers. I'm still not sure about the origin of the message that fueled that identity. I know some of them came from what I saw growing up in my family. My mom didn't work outside the home until I was in my late teens. She was the room parent, the Girl Scout leader, the swim team mom, the carpool coordinator, etc. That's a picture I had in my head for me, but with work somehow added to the vision. I just do what she did. Plus work full-time and finish graduate school. The whole idea that something would have to give wasn't for me. That was for the other mothers, the ones who couldn't do it all. I figured that I belonged to a different group of moms, the ones in the commercials. I like their message better. Buy the laptop and working from home with a newborn will be easy and you'll be hip, cool, and funky. Start your business work from home morning with our coffee and you'll live in a cool loft in Soho and have great clothes. If you buy our detergent, you'll find yourself walking on the beach with your baby in one hand and your promotion letter in the other. Practicing critical awareness, there are expectations that women can do it all, the superwoman syndrome. Despite my best efforts and the lessons I've learned, I sometimes still think I can do it all and all at the same time. I think the expectation exists as a result of women striving for equality in the workforce, yet not getting the support and help that is necessary for real equality. I also think they need to do it all at the same time, especially working in mothering is related to the fact that we view motherhood as unpaid, unimportant, easy work. The reality is that raising children is more difficult and rewarding than any job I've ever had. You just don't get formally educated, validated, or paid. Lastly, the entire debate over going back to work versus staying at home is reversed for women who have the resources to think of work as an option. We often blame women for taking on too much, for choosing the superwoman lifestyle. Many women have to do it all, or their kids won't eat, or their kids don't eat. For me, part of practicing critical awareness is constantly decoding messages. Sometimes when people make comments about our choices, it feels shaming and we don't know why. Here are some of the conflicting underlying messages that fuel our shame and self-doubt. You are what you earn. Motherhood is easy. What else do you do? You should have a real job. You need your own money and identity. You should be at home. That's your job. If you were a better mother or better professional, you could do both easily. Reaching out. When it comes to my personal struggles with appearance, family, parenting, motherhood, and work, I'm 100% dependent on my connection network. I depend on them for advice, guidance, support, feedback, validation, praise, and sometimes I need them for plain old hand-holding or babysitting. I've worked very hard to build this network. It's now big and strong. I also depend on these people to lean on me. I know it sounds funny, but I want to be in a relationship that works both ways. Receiving empathy is a wonderful gift, but so is offering it. Both giving and receiving make me a better person and help me increase my shame resilience. My shame web around these issues is primarily the media and myself. I constantly work on it, but I'm still vulnerable to magazines and movies. I have to be vigilant about practicing critical awareness and talking to my connection network about these topics. There are also friends and family who can push buttons, especially about parenting and work. Speaking shame. If the goal of speaking shame is learning how to express how we feel and ask for what we need, then I'd say I'm getting better. I'm definitely better at the former. Like many women, I often find it difficult to ask for what I need, especially if I need help or support. During the interviews, an interesting pattern emerged around help seeking. It seems that many women struggle to ask for help or support. So often, we are the caregivers and helpers. We convince ourselves that we shouldn't need help, so we don't ask for it. Then we get angry or hurt because no one offers. We think, doesn't he see me drowning? Why won't she do something? This quickly escalates into a blame and shame situation. We need help, but we don't ask for it. We get angry because we don't get it. We feel ashamed for even thinking someone would help us when we knew they wouldn't. For me, asking for help is a work in progress. Growth and goal setting. As we become more fluent in speaking shame, the power and meaning behind words become more apparent. Women with high levels of shame resilience use very different language from women who are struggling with shame in the same area. For example, when I spoke to women about appearance, motherhood, parenting, work, and family, women who demonstrated high levels of shame resilience spoke about perfection and more about growth. Some of the language pattern I heard include, I want to work on getting better at, I'd like to improve the way I'd like to do a little less of this and a little more of. These are my goals. I want to be perceived as doing my best at. I want to be perceived as trying. When we choose growth over perfection, we immediately increase our shame resilience. Improvement is a far more realistic goal than perfection. Merely letting go of unattainable goals makes us less susceptible to shame. When we believe we must be this, we ignore who or what we actually are, our capacity and our limitations. We start from the image of perfection, and of course, from perfection, there is nowhere to go but down. When we think, I want my parents to see me as the perfect daughter, all we can do is fail. First, perfection is unattainable. Second, we can't control how people perceive us. Lastly, there is no way that we can do every single thing that is expected of us or that we expect of ourselves. When our goal is growth and we say, I'd like to improve this, we start from where we're at, where and who we are. My computer is not doing well. It's actually dying. So that's why the light keeps going kind of brighter and softer. I'd like to work on my relationship with my parents is a completely different goal from I want my parents to see me as a perfect daughter. To illustrate how different these statements are, hold on one second. I have to plug it back in because it's not holding a charge. But I can't sit any longer, so there you go. To illustrate how different these statements are, many of the women I interviewed describe how their relationship with their parents improved after they stopped trying to be the perfect daughter. This also holds true for parents, motherhood, and parenting. When we give ourselves permission to be imperfect, when we find self-worth despite our imperfections, when we build connection networks that affirm and value us as imperfect beings, we are much more capable of change. This goes back to the sentence that launched this entire journey for me. You cannot shame or belittle people into changing. This means we can't use self-hate to lose weight. We can't shame ourselves into becoming better parents. We can't belittle ourselves or our families into becoming who we need them to be. Putting people on their loser board doesn't work. Shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we are capable of change. Say that again. Shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we are capable of change. Goal setting. Women with high levels of shame resilience did not trade perfection for goals of working towards perfection. Building shame resilience requires realistic goal setting. Saying, I don't ever want to be perceived as impatient is the same as saying, I want to work on becoming more patient so I never get angry. Ultimately, the goal of both approaches is still perfection. When I ask women about growth goals, like I want to be more patient, I ask them how they saw that happening. Based on their answers, I saw a direct connection between their level of shame resilience and their ability to identify specific objectives related to their goals. For example, Cheryl, a good friend and colleague, told me her parenting goals are to be fun, strong, kind, knowledgeable, and patient and loving. She specifically said that these were her goals, and she knew it was unrealistic to be all these things all the time. When I asked what she did to meet these goals, she was very confidently started listing simple, measurable, they happen or they don't, tangible objectives. She said, I get sleep. I'm a better parent when I'm well rested. Even though it's difficult, I keep my sons on schedule so they feel good. I read a lot of parenting books. When they're good, I use the advice. When they are, I don't. When I see another parent doing something well, I ask him or her about it. My husband and I go to parenting workshops. I stay connected with mothers groups. I changed pediatricians several times until I found one who shares my values and gives me the guidance I want and need. I set boundaries with my work. When someone criticizes my parenting, I have a support system of friends to talk about it. I try to practice self-care by taking the time I need to replenish my own well. When my well is dry, I don't have anything to give to anyone else. Oddly, growth and goal setting can feel like more work than dreaming of perfection. When we try to be perfect, we fail so often that we almost get used to it. After a while, we trick ourselves into believing that forecasting perfection is nobler than working towards goals. It's much easier to say, I'll be thin by December rather than I'll start eating healthy and exercising today, or things will be great when we get out of debt rather than I won't buy anything on credit card this week. on the credit card this week. When we set realistic objectives for meeting growth goals, we hold ourselves accountable for today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, rather than postponing accountability until 6 months down the line. Women with what I would consider the highest level of shame resilience around perfection issue have very realistic goals and concrete, measurable strategies for meeting these goals. One example was a woman who struggled with an eating disorder for more than 10 years. She said that she overcame her eating disorder and the shame around being bulimic by setting realistic written health goals for every week rather than universal thinness goals. She said she no longer wants to be perceived as thin, but as healthy. And she works towards that by exercising for 30 minutes 5 times a week and eating at least 3 healthy meals per day. One of the benefits of growth through goal setting is that it is not an all or nothing proposition. Success or failure is not the only possible outcome. If our goal is to be a better parent, we set 2 reasonable objectives of reading 1 parenting article per month and talking to parents who demonstrate skills we respect. We can still learn and grow even if we don't meet all the objectives. If we don't read the article, but we learn a lot from another parent, that is still growth. And maybe we learn that reading articles is not our strength. Maybe it would be very more helpful to spend even more time around other parents. When we set improvement goals and set measurable objectives to meet these goals, we can learn and grow from both missed and met objectives. If our goal is perfection, we will inevitably fail, and that failure offers us nothing in terms of learning and change. It only makes us vulnerable to shame. Going back. The ability to learn from our mistakes rather than seeing them as failed attempts at perfection is the essence of going back. Going back emerged as an extremely important concept in this research. Women with high levels of shame resilience in the area of parents, motherhood, parenting, work, and family spoke passionately about the value of believing that it's never too late to grow and change. They resisted being defined by mistakes and viewed imperfection as a necessary part of growth rather than a barrier. Furthermore, many of these same women emphasize the value of having members of their connection network who modeled going back as a powerful strategy for growth and change. Women were especially influenced by their parents' willingness to change and grow as parents. In contrast, women who spoke of ongoing shame struggles in these same areas perceived past mistakes and failed attempts at perfection as enduring and permanently altered their levels of connection and power. Like the women who demonstrated high levels of shame resilience, they were equally influenced by outside forces. However, in these cases, those forces were mostly members of their shame webs rather than their connection network. When women spoke about the permanency of mistakes and the inability to move away from perfection and towards growth, at least 80% of them described this attribute as something they learned from their parents and or families. So the first reason that going back is an important concept in shame resilience relates to our ability to move past mistakes and failures towards change and growth. Second reason is it influences on our efforts to build empathy through connection network. Not only do we need to be willing to go back and learn from our mistakes, we need people in our lives who are willing to do the same. Of all the insights that emerged from this study, none are more powerful to me than the influence parents have on their children. It didn't matter if I'm talking to an 18-year-old or a 60-year-old. Women are greatly affected by their parents' willingness to go back and continually try to improve their relationship with their children. This was clear in all areas, but especially in the areas that fall into the perfection category. Of all the voices shouting expectations or whispering quiet affirmations, the voices of parents were constantly reported to be among the most influential. When parents instill expectations of perfection in their children, it's very difficult for children to exchange that goal for growth and improvement. This is especially true when parents use shame as a tool to enforce expectation. Women whose parents demonstrated their own commitment to going back by encouraging them to strive for growth rather than perfection felt greater connection and empathy from their parents. It is difficult for me to capture in writing the emotion conveyed by participants when they explained what it meant to hear their parents say, "I'm sorry," or "I understand how that made you feel." When parents acknowledge the pain felt by their children, really show empathy without explaining or defending, amazing healing can happen. Conversely, women whose parents continued to enforce expectations of perfection into adulthood either continued to struggle with shame or had to work diligently to develop resilience in the face of their parents' ongoing expectation. Remember the example from the last chapter where the mother told her daughter, "My God, you're still fat." What if, after listening to her daughter explain how shaming that was for her, the mother had responded by saying, "I don't want to shame you or hurt you. I'm sorry that I've done that. I want us to be close. I love you." This wouldn't automatically repair the relationship, but what a powerful start towards healing. Yes, I'm sure at some point this mother would want to explain or defend her motivation by saying, "I'm just so worried about your health." But to really go back, it's important that we start by first just acknowledging the pain we've caused and a desire to rebuild connection. In my life, I've experienced the power of having parents who are willing to go back. Before I became a parent, I wanted to do everything that I thought they did wrong perfectly. Now that I'm a parent, I only hope that I'm as willing to go back as my parents are. I was recently talking to my dad about parenting, and he told me, "You can't parent perfectly. Your only measure of success is your children's ability to parent even better than you and your willingness to support them in that process." I thought about this statement for a long time. It's powerful to observe your parents' willingness to re-examine their choices. It's even more powerful when you think about how your children will one day ask the same of you. One of the greatest barriers to getting back into relating to empathy, if our goal is perfection rather than growth, it is unlikely that we are willing to go back because it requires a level of self-empathy, the ability to look at our own actions with understanding and compassion, to understand our experiences in the context in which they happen, and to do all this without judgment. I call this ability to reflect on our own actions with empathy grounding. Grounding. When we choose growth over perfection, we choose empathy and connection. I use this term grounding because in order to examine where we are, where we want to go, and how we want to get there, we must have a level of self-acceptance about who we are. Grounding gives us the stability we need to reach out and examine who we are and who we want to be. The more grounded we are, the less we feel compelled to defend our decisions and protect ourselves. We can look at ourselves with compassion rather than self-loathe. Grounding also prevents us from chasing acceptance and belonging by attempting to become whatever people need us to be. During the interviews, I met two women who had similar stories regarding their appearance. Both women had been very overweight during their teens and early 20s. Both women were in their mid-30s, very slim, and had young daughters at the same time of the interview. The first woman had great contempt for the person she used to be. She told me I was fat and disgusted. I can't believe I ever looked like that. She went on to tell me how much she disliked overweight women. She told me that her mother was very slim and was constantly on her about her weight. She said that she has two daughters and she watches everything they eat. She said that her oldest, who was 7 at the time of the interview, was already on a diet. She told me that it was better that she told her daughter that she was looking fat rather than her school peers. I sensed that this woman, despite having lost weight, still had a great amount of shame attached to her weight issues. She appeared more rooted in shame than grounded in self-acceptance. The second told me that she had struggled with her weight for 25 years. She said she was an overweight child and didn't get into shape until she turned 30. When I asked her how she felt when she thought back to her life when she was overweight, she said, it was just part of who I am. I got married and had my children during that period of time. I lost my mom during my 20s. Just like everyone else, I had good and bad times. She said that her daughter and son were too young to really remember her being that heavy. So when they see old movies and pictures, they sometimes make comments. She said, I explained that it hurts my feelings when they make fun of my old pictures. I also use them as an example of why you shouldn't judge people based on how they look. They love me and think I'm a great mom. I told them if all you saw was a fat woman, you missed all the good stuff. They have become very sensitive about this issue with their friends. This woman said she felt great power and freedom about her appearance. She said she had a huge support system of friends and family. She seemed securely grounded in self-acceptance. Celebrating the ordinary and uncool. One destructive obsession related to perfectionism is the fascination with celebrity culture. We desperately flip through magazines to find out all of the intimate details about the stars we love and the ones we hate. We want to know who has lost weight, how they decorate their house, what they eat, what they feed their dogs, you name it. If they eat it, wear it, own it, or lose it, we want to do the same. We want to share in their lives because we believe it's the way we bring us closer to the perfection we seek. Celebrities also bring us closer to another highly convet asset, coolness. The importance of being cool should not be underestimated. We know that teenagers will often take terrible physical and psychological risks to maintain their coolness among their peers. Unfortunately, in our culture, the value of cool doesn't decline after high school. Women from age 18 to 80 spoke to me about the emotional pain of being perceived as uncool or unhip. They spoke as candidly about some of the life-altering consequences they face as a result of trying to maintain a perception of being with it. Unfortunately, in a culture driven by profit, there are multi-billion-dollar industries making sure that perfection and coolness stay as elusive as they are seductive. There is no such thing as a perfect enough or cool enough. In her book, The Shelter of Each Other, Rebuilding Our Families, Mary Pfeiffer speaks wisely about the real threat that media poses to our family. She explains that the media forms our new community, a community far less diverse than real life. We know celebrities, but they don't know us. The new community is not receptive. It's not the same as neighborhoods like earlier ones. David Letterman won't be helping out if our car battery dies on a winter morning. Donald Trump won't bring groceries over if dad loses his job. These vicarious relationships create a new kind of loneliness, the loneliness of people whose relationships are with personas instead of persons. In addition to fostering perfectionism and loneliness, which are often connected, there is the issue of comparing our lives with the lives of celebrities. We watch hours of shows that do nothing more than detail their comings and goings, and consciously or unconsciously would compare our lives to theirs. In my research with both women and men, many participants, see, I can't read today. Many participants talked about feeling ashamed of their small, boring lives. With very few exceptions, these participants were comparing their lives to what they saw on television or read about in magazines. Dr. Pfeiffer also explains the phenomenon in the context of the new media community. She writes, the electronic community is less diverse than real life. The problems it deals with are not the problems real people face. Certain situations, such as young starlets being threatened or handsome men fighting crimes, are overexploited. explored. Other stories, much more common, such as a school board meeting, poetry writing, trips to museum, piano practice, or the delivery of Meals on Wheels, are virtually ignored. People who are not visually interesting, which are most of us, are underrepresented. The stories that are selected are those that make money. A richness and complexity of real life disappears. In our culture, the fear and shame of being ordinary is very real. In fact, many of the older women I interviewed spoke about looking back on their lives and grieving for the extraordinary things that would never come to pass. We seem to measure the value of people's contribution and sometimes their entire lives, but their level of public recognition. In other words, worth is measured by fame and fortune. Our culture is quick to diminish quiet, ordinary, hardworking men and women. In many instances, we equate ordinary with boring, or even more dangerous, ordinary has become synonymous with meaningless. One of the greatest cultural consequences of devaluing our own lives has been our tolerance for what people do to achieve their extraordinary status. Baseball players who pump themselves full of steroids and hormones are heroes. Corporate leaders with billion-dollar salary packages are envied, even if their employers are losing their pensions and benefits at the same time. Young girls are starting websites and chat rooms to talk about their tricks that celebrities use to hide their eating disorders in order to stay thin and beautiful. Young children are overstressed and suffering from high rates of anxiety due to the overscheduling of extracurricular activities and the emphasis on standardized testing scores. These examples beg the question, what are we willing to sacrifice in our pursuit of the extraordinary? We can use the shame resilience tools to learn more about our fears and our vulnerabilities to cultural pressures. Practicing critical awareness is especially important if we want to better understand the media community that has become part of our lives. Fearing vulnerability. If we're going to recognize and accept what makes us human, including our imperfections and less than extraordinary lives, we must embrace our vulnerabilities. This is extremely difficult because we are afraid to be vulnerable. As I wrote in chapter 1, we equate vulnerability with weakness, and in our culture, there are very few things we abhor more than weakness. When I listen to women talk about their fear of being vulnerable, I heard the same thing over and over. I don't want to share information with someone and have them use it against me. It is extremely painful to share vulnerability or fear with someone, only to have them use it against me as an insult or leverage in an argument or as a fodder for gossip. One concept that emerged across the interviews is what I call the vulnerability hangover. The vulnerability hangover directly relates to our fear of vulnerability, and unfortunately, most of us have experienced it. We've all been in situations where we were with a friend, colleague, or family member, and we feel the deep yearning to connect. Despite the fear, we feel that push or we need to share something meaningful, and before you know it, we let it all out. We've told them everything, shared our deepest vulnerability. The next hour, day, or week, that feeling of regret comes over us like a warm wave of nausea. Oh my God, why did I tell her that? What is she going to think about my family? Who's she going to tell? That's a vulnerability hangover. When we begin to work on our shame resilience, the need to reach out and talk about our experience can be a very strong force. So strong, in fact, that it sometimes leads us to purging with people with whom we have not developed the kind of relationship that can absorb that information. The good thing about the vulnerability hangover is that it's universal. When I talk about this concept in my lectures, I usually see a room of nodding heads and expressions that convey, oh yeah, been there, hated it. When it comes to sharing information, it would be nice to believe that most of us have the ability to recognize the right people, the right times, and the right ways to share. But alas, the reality is that most of us have turned to people we barely know and thrown up vulnerability all over them. Harriet Lerner often offers some wonderful advice on this topic. She writes, when it comes to sharing vulnerability, it's wise to take time to test whether the other person is worthy of hearing our stories and to assess our own level of safety and comfort in sharing sensitive material. We want to trust that the other person isn't going to deny and minimize our pains or alternatively over-focus on our problems in an unhelpful way. We don't want to be put down, pitied, or gossip about, nor do we want to have sensitive information used against us. Fear of vulnerability and expectations. I'm hoping I get through these pages because I have to end at 3:30. We also fear vulnerability because it's often related to our expectations and the pain and disappointment. Elizabeth, a woman I interviewed several years ago, talked about the shame she felt when she wasn't offered a promotion she was expecting. She said, I was most ashamed because I told everyone how much it meant to me. I talked about it with everyone, my husband, my kids, my neighbors, my mom, my colleagues. It's not that I told everyone I was going to get it. I was just honest about how much I wanted it. Instead of just feeling sad and disappointed, I felt sad, disappointed, and ashamed. When somebody has the courage to share their hopes with us, we are given an important opportunity to practice compassion and connection. Think how powerful it might have been for Elizabeth to hear, yet such courage to apply for that promotion and then to be honest about how much you wanted it. I'm so proud to be your daughter, friend, or mother. As Elizabeth's example demonstrates, there is a complex relationship between our expectations, vulnerabilities, and fears. When we develop expectations, we paint a picture in our head of how things are going to be and how they're going to look. Sometimes as we go so far as to imagine what they're going to feel like, taste like, and smell like. We put a picture in our head that holds great value for us. We set expectations based not only on how we fit in that picture, but also on what those around us are doing in that picture. And often the failure we feel with those expectations do not come to pass results in shame. When I lose 30 pounds, this is what it's going to look like. If I get accepted into graduate school, this is what's going to feel like. If we can buy this house, all of this will change. If I tell my father how I feel, he will understand. If I do this for my children, they will be very grateful. Sometimes broken expectations lead only to mild disappointments, but in many cases, they lead to shame, especially if vulnerability and fear are at work. Kelly, one of the participants I interviewed, spoke very candidly about how her expectation and fears constantly set her up for shame whenever she was around her mother-in-law. Kelly describes her mother-in-law as very critical of the way she parented, very critical of the fact that she stayed at home with her kids, and very critical of the way she treated her husband, this woman's son. When we talked about her mother-in-law's visit, she described how she planned for weeks, sometimes even months, for the visit. She would go to great lengths to engineer situations that would allow her to demonstrate the kind of parenting and parenting skills she thought would please her mother-in-law. Without fail, every time her mother-in-law visited, nothing worked as planned. Not only did her mother-in-law remain critical, she also saw right through Kelly's transparent efforts to manufacture situations that made her look good. Regardless of what she did, regardless of what we do, we can't control how people are going to respond or react. We lose 30 pounds so we can see the looks on our friends' faces at the class reunion. What happens when there's no look? When we experience anything from mild disappointment to major shame. Kelly told me that she eventually stopped trying to predict and control her visits with her mother-in-law. When Kelly and her husband finally shared their feelings with Kelly's mother-in-law, she was somewhat unresponsive. Kelly finally developed other strategies for dealing with the visits. She limited the duration of the visits, and she prepared for them in much different ways. Rather than trying to control the visits, she surrounded herself with support from her family and her girlfriends. Kelly actually shared this story with me as an example of developing shame resilience. She said that she never expected it to change because she'd change. She thought it would change because her mother-in-law would eventually change. I think that's the trouble with expectation. They're often unrealistic and placed on the wrong people. In the next section, we'll discuss an interesting exercise that can help us recognize our fears and reality check our expectation. The life shuffle. The pregnancy shuffle is a very powerful exercise that many hospitals use in their childbirth preparation classes. Expectant parents are given 10 note cards and asked to write one important expectation for the labor and delivery on each card. There's an assumption that families are hoping for healthy outcomes for mother and child, so they're asked not to include those. Women typically write things like vaginal delivery, no epidural, no inducement, no episiotomy, family arrives on time, no forceps, latches to breast immediately, formally feed, and nice nurses. Their cards describe the picture that they're painted in their mind about their labor and delivery. When they're finished and proudly gazing at their cards, they're asked to flip the cards over so they can't see what's on them, shuffling them and picking 5 from the 10. At this point, they're told that these 5 cards out of the other 5 do not. Told that these 5 work out and the other 5 do not. Then they're asked, do you feel prepared if 5 out of the 10 happen rather than 10 of the 10? I think this is a very profound exercise and not just for labor and delivery. We should expand this exercise to the life shuffle. When we develop expectations in our minds that we have entire self-worth riding on their realization, we set ourselves up for shame. Using the life shuffle to acknowledge our vulnerability and fears is a powerful way to reality check some of the expectation. The magnification principle. The life shuffle can help us better understand how much emotions we've attached to specific expectations. But if we're going to address expectations and the fear of vulnerability, we have to talk about how most women are socialized to believe that certain life events are lifesavers. No matter how bad things are, if we find a boyfriend, things will be better. If we get married, they'll be even better. If we have children, they'll be so much better, we won't be able to stand it. Though the research process, I've come to believe that whatever problems you take into a life event will become instantly magnified that moment that hoopla surrounding that life event comes to a close. If you're single and struggling with identity issues, finding a partner will magnify your issues. Again, the magnification may not show up until the shine of a new love is over, but it will show up. Whatever problem you and your partner take into a marriage gets magnified. The same thing applies to having children. Not only are the issues staying, they're going to get more complicated and complex. If your parents' approval is very important to you, having a child will not change that. You'll just have many more items to submit for approval. I interviewed a woman in her late 50s who told me that she married her physically abusive boyfriend despite warnings from her friends and family. At the time, she believed his promise to work on his anger once they got married. After the birth of her first son, her husband became more violent. She felt totally isolated. She said, I didn't listen to anyone. I really believed getting married or having kids would change him. It was so bad, but there was no way I could go to my parents or friends. They warned me. I stayed until he broke my nose and my arm. I couldn't hide that from my family. Change can happen, and there's always a potential for growth. However, a life event will not provide that change or growth we're seeking. If we get married, the jealous partner becomes more fearful because the stakes are higher. The mother who expects us to do everything perfectly has even higher expectation because the stakes are higher. Strained sibling relationships become even more strained in the face of family caregiving challenges. In this way, the magnification principle serves as a catalyst for exposing the failed expectations tied to a major life event. When we have our self-worth riding the realization of something that we can't control, we put our self-worth in jeopardy. When we say this relationship will get better, we just need to get married, and things got worse after you get married, that can become a tremendous source of shame. Again, if we're going to recognize and accept what makes us human, including our imperfection and less than extraordinary lives, we must embrace our fears and vulnerabilities. Understanding our fears are part of shame resilience process. It's also an important piece in building the kind of relationship that we need to have full and connected lives. I have 5 minutes to spare. Thank you, everyone, for listening to that hour and a half of that reading. Thank you, and sorry about all the errors. Have a good day. Bye.